combined backpack meeting, bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee meetings. It is now 4:39. Start recording, sir?
I did.
Okay, good. All right. Welcome. Call to order. Attendance, Matt McGrath.
Present.
Jonathan Day. Nancy Hagerman.
Present.
Alexis Junk. Jody Norris.
Present.
Ron Norton.
Here.
Susan Heffley, here. Kim Austin.
Here.
Daniel Krim.
I'm here.
Estella Hollander.
Here.
Samantha Meyer.
I'm here.
Matthew Mitchell.
Here.
And Valerie Peet.
Here.
Hyatt. All right. Jeffrey Bauman on the city staff.
He's gone today.
Martin Ince.
I'm here.
Lieutenant Ryan Turley. Adam Williams.
Present.
Great. And we have a number of others. We've got Councilman McCarthy here. We have Citizen Shimoni, Brian Cooper, Dapper Dre, David Lemke, Jason Kordowski, Kevin Hayes, and Steph Santana. Oh, Jeff. Oh, no response. He's on the list. Are those are just invited? Okay. All right. All right. First comments from the backpack group. Anybody have that?
I rode in today with a fellow bicyclist and she wanted me to mention that she's disappointed that she doesn't have a bike lane between the country club and like Bear Paw, probably that area, which I think we identified. She just wanted me to bring it up again.
Okay,
That's all I have.
thank you. Kim.
I have to make an announcement. Lauren's laughing. I have a new position. I am now the TDM planner for Metro Plan. So I no longer work for the county and I will be attending both BAC and PAC, either flip-flop or as needed, as instructed by Martin.
You found a way to stay.
He found, I'm still here and I'm not going anywhere. Yes,
Yoo-hoo.
yes.
Metro Plans gang.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. We're on week number 2, so don't ask me any questions.
So I thought cookies were going to be one of your
So I will,
bring cookies
I
to the
will-
meeting.
yes, okay, I will work on that. Yes.
Not because you're a woman at all. Not at all because of that. I just thought since Martin's getting some help finally.
Anything in particular, just a variety of cookies.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so with that move, does that open up a seat in the BAC then?
No.
She's still here, both of them.
No, because I thought we already had enough people. Didn't we have enough people on BAC?
I think you were one who is rotating out, like you're at the.
Yeah, I was rotating out. And so I thought we
If
had,
you leave, that does open up a seat.
oh, does it?
It does.
I thought I was still just
No, you're not, we don't have any extras.
lateral damage or
No,
something.
no.
That's what I thought I was. Okay, cool. Okay.
Matt and I are on the chopping block eventually, so. Okay, any other comments, questions? I had a couple, of course. I don't really need to mention it. Most of the separated lanes are choked with gravel.
Yeah.
Pretty badly. I don't know if we talked about this. I did look last time I was going up and down Beaver and Butler that most of the curbs that were removed were on the outside of curves and were chopped up because they are in the location where cars going too fast drift into the bike lanes.
If you can hang on to that, then we have it as an agenda item. So you don't
Okay,
have to
I'll
do
put a
that as
pin in that.
announcements.
All right. And then I think my other comments will fall into all your categories, so I will leave it at that. Any other backpack comments? All right, then we'll open it up to the public. I guess I should watch here for hands.
I'll keep an eye out for it.
Okay, great. None of the public has any comments, questions, or anything? Nope. All right. And I guess, Martin and I talked about, we were gonna move, the engineering standards and the Milton, topics before we got to the Butler part, since the Butler part is probably gonna dominate like it always does. So why don't you go ahead with the, revisions to engineering standards?
Okay. Chair Heffley, give me just a moment to call it up and I'll share it.
Okay. Would anybody like to sing a song in this short interlude? Nope. There you go.
Like singing. I don't have enough time though.
I'm Henry Diane, Henry.
I'll slow down. Go ahead.
Started. I got them. She's been married 7 times before. And it was Henry.
Henry.
So let's see.
Name that band.
Tournaments
Wait, sea shanty.
Second verse, same as the first.
first.
Are we having too much fun?
We are. Just wait till we ride home in the snow, although the snow is not gonna start till
After the meeting.
8 to 10, so we're gonna be pretty good. So did everyone have a nice holiday? Did they go someplace where biking was fantastic? No? Probably no.
How did that song pop in my head?
I don't know. Usually if you ask for a random song, everybody starts into Gilligan's Island. And that'll doom you for the rest of the day. Okay, it looks like Martin's ready. Mostly.
Not quite.
Not quite. Oh, second verse.
Second
The
verse, same as the first. They actually say that in the song.
They do.
It's hilarious, I think.
I've been on a Moody Blues pick, so. D60s.
We'd like to sing it, but he's ready.
I don't have a synthesizer. Wouldn't work.
All right, this is Nights in White Satin.
Oh, yeah.
Tuesday afternoon. So this item is one particular aspect of the revisions to engineering standards. Just more generally, I think we talked about this at one of our previous meetings, but I wanted to give you an update on the schedule. So we met with the Chamber of Business Advocacy Group on January 18th. We had a public meeting yesterday in this room, and it was well attended by a lot of engineers and a handful of interested citizens. Today we had a virtual meeting online for people who couldn't make the physical open house. And again, pretty good attendance. Generally, a lot of engineers who work with these standards kind of on a daily basis. We have planned for a council work session on February 27th. And then on March 19th, we think that the final version will go to council for approval. These are adopted by ordinance. And so there's a first and second read before the council. There is a survey open on the city's website, and I can share that with you if you're interested. It essentially goes through all the sections of revisions and then invites you or gives you an opportunity to comment individually on each one. So it does kind of require you to go through all the sections to get to the one that you want to comment on. There is a handy guide that Steph put together that describes all the changes. So you can see kind of in a nutshell what changes are being made. So the one thing that I wanted to talk about in particular as a follow-up to our last conversation is about rolled curbs, which was added as a potential revision since the last time we met. And I do think this has some impacts on pedestrian and bicycle travel. So I wanted to make sure that both groups had a chance to look at it and provide comments before it moved forward. We don't have a formal motion as part of this, but I'm happy to write down all the comments and just pass them along to the city folks who are working on this.
So what was the change? 2 road curbs or away from road curbs or what?
It's generally, I'll describe it here in more detail, but it's generally to allow rolled curbs in more situations in residential development.
Yeah.
So when we need to define terminology first, just to make sure that everybody understands, there's really 2 types of curbs. Vertical curbs and roll curbs. Vertical curbs are shown on the left. They're just as they are described. There's a vertical face that's 6 inches in height. Curbs in general keep water in the street. That's their primary function in that gutter pan. They also do other things like make it more difficult for cars to go over them. Cars hit them frequently, as you can see here in this image. There's more than a few tire marks. Roll curbs are different in that they're flatter. And instead of going up 6 inches, they only go up 4 inches. And typically you can drive over them. It's not completely smooth, but it's possible to drive over them. So does that make sense? Just that distinction between the 2? Okay, so in our current engineering standards, rolled curbs are allowed in streets and townhouse and plant options where lot widths are 40 feet or less. And the reason for that is at 40 feet, driveways can take up most of it. Lots are very narrow. So when there's a lot of driveways, there would be a cut and then vertical curb, a cut, a vertical curb. And if there's rolled curb, it just all kind of is at the same level and a driveway can go anywhere. There's no difference between where there's a driveway and where there's a curb. The proposed standards would allow them in single family and townhouse, in addition to multifamily development, where lot widths are 50 feet or less. So again, fairly narrow lots, where vertical curb is not required for drainage. Again, that function of keeping water in the street. Where a minimum 5-foot parkway is provided, except on cul-de-sacs. And just again, terminology, parkways are what we call that strip of land between the sidewalk and the curb on the street. So it provides a buffer. In a suburban context, we would see maybe landscaping or trees in a parkway. In an urban context, it would be where mailboxes, street poles, trees, benches, bike racks would go there, and they're referred to as a furnishing strip. On cul-de-sacs, we don't require a parkway currently on cul-de-sacs because the distance, the amount of space that they take up has grown larger over the years, and having the parkway would adds to that distance. The standards do require that vertical curb be provided at corners, so at street corners. Also, we require curb ramps, accessible ramps, to be provided at corners, and that would not change. And those would be located in the area where the vertical curb is required. So I bring these things up just to let you know that there are some guardrails on their use. It's not that we're allowing them everywhere. They would be reviewed almost development by development. There are some advantages to rolled curbs. Generally, they're less expensive because it does not require subsequent builders to cut the vertical curb to create a space for a driveway. And it also eliminates the need for driveway wings, which can, in denser developments, even single family where lot widths are narrow, there can be a lot of concrete when driveways are kind of spaced side by side. Our concerns are that rolled curbs make it very easy for vehicles to go over and park either in the parkway or on the sidewalk. So in cases where we have rolled curbs and no parkway, it's pretty common to see vehicles that partially block the sidewalk because they'll pull up. For some reason, even people who drive really, really big vehicles feel like they need to get out of the street when they park it. When they have that opportunity with rolled curbs, they'll put a couple wheels up on above the curb. If there's a parkway there, they may be on the parkway, but there may be a vehicle parked just adjacent to the sidewalk. Second concern is that it reduces the effectiveness of queuing streets for speed management. Queuing streets are streets that are narrow enough that when 2 cars pass side by side, one has to kind of yield to the other one. They can't go by each other at speed. And that's especially the case when cars are parked on both sides, so that the space left in between just becomes so narrow that they have to kind of negotiate how to pass each other. That provides traffic calming. So there's a concern that when we provide narrow streets like that, there will be more temptation for people to use the rolled curbs to park on either the parkway or the sidewalk. Presumably the parkway, because they would be required in the future where they're allowed. And then finally, in a lot of places where we have higher density development, especially developments that have a high percentage of student populations, there tends to be a lot of vehicles. And so there's kind of pressure to find more places to park than just the formal ones that were provided as part of the development. And so if there's rolled curb, do we end up with situations where the parkway gets paved and now is used as informal parking? If there's yards in single family or townhouse development, do those just become kind of gravelled over and paved over and serve as de facto parking spaces, even though that's not what they were intended for? I have included a recommendation in this case. This, as you may recall, this first round of engineering standard revisions is really just kind of more simple changes that are administrative in nature that don't change anything related to policy. And so if it were removed from this round of revisions, it could still be taken up as a consideration in the next round, but it would give us more time to consider the ins and outs and maybe build in more safety measures or guardrails if there are concerns to avoid those things, and just generally have more time to talk it through. And with that, I'll open it for comments. Again, I stand ready to record your comments and pass them on.
I guess the main comment I have is I know they redid our street and they put in vertical curbs because they hold more water. And then, within a year or two, we found ourselves in a neighborhood that was subject to flooding. And I project that flooding may become more common in Flagstaff as burning of the forest becomes more common. So just keep that in mind, that neighborhoods that may not need to hold water right now may need it in the future.
So you're saying that like vertical curbs provide that function, like he would keep more water in the street,
Right.
As opposed to like flooding houses.
Correct. And that's, when they were building it, they said the vertical curbs hold water much better. And I don't know how much better, but I was glad for it when my house didn't get flooded.
The rolled curves are what, 4 inches, right?
4 inches were
Yeah.
6.
6, yeah.
I think.
Yes.
This brings to mind the presentation we saw a few months ago from the group of, someone helped me out with this. It was a group of people who'd come to the city with accessibility concerns for the sidewalks and had taken a lot of photos of different sidewalks around town for pedestrians, and people parking in the parkway or on the sidewalk was one of the major concerns, particularly in specific neighborhoods. So I think that's happens frequently. And I would agree that maybe wider implementation of rolled curbs would decrease access to sidewalks. And that could be an issue.
I will bring up, and maybe I should have mentioned it, but we did, I think the group was associated with the city's Commission on Inclusion and Adaptive.
Yes, thank you.
And we made the same presentation to them a couple of weeks ago at their meeting. The two concerns that they brought up with rolled curbs is just that they're involved in a pretty big effort to keep blockages from impacting sidewalks. And that could be anything from parked cars to trash cans to landscaping. And they were concerned that allowing rolled curbs would make that task more difficult if we allowed rolled curbs in more places. And the second thing they brought up is when there are sidewalk blockages, sometimes people who use wheelchairs have to use driveways to get to cross the street, for example, to get to the other side where the sidewalk isn't blocked. And it's more difficult to go over a rolled curb than a standard driveway with vertical curbs. It's more difficult for a wheelchair just because it's actually it's more bumpy for a car to go over as well. Like you feel that difference, but for a wheelchair, it makes a big difference. Those were their two concerns.
So it seems like this is kind of a hot topic. When is this second round gonna be considered?
It hasn't been scheduled yet. It's TBD.
Years.
Right. I know, and like the city's working on a code analysis right now. Do you know if that's part of this? I think the engineering standards are being evaluated.
I don't think it is. It could be. But I don't know that it is specifically now.
Comment?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sensitive to the more difficult for a wheelchair to get up. My wife uses a wheelchair and I can see how that could be a problem. On the other side of the argument, the city is trying to go through an effort to make housing more accessible and lower the price where we can. And it would save a significant amount of money if we could go with rolled curbs. And as you put on your slide, they don't have to come in and cut it all out, re-pour the whole section. So that would save a lot of money.
And I think the issue with like cutting driveways in is more applicable to single family development where there are lots and people pick houses and the driveway may be in this side, the driveway may be in that side, the driveway may be in the middle. If it's townhouses or multifamily, typically that's already planned out ahead of time. So when they pour the curbs, they could pour the driveways at the same time.
So in the
Just-
case of
there's
like
different-
townhouses, maybe we'd be more inclined to say you need a vertical curb. We're in like quarter acre lot, single family homes. It might make more sense to allow rolled curbs there. And at the intersections, they usually have, like you pointed out, they're gonna have a special rules for the intersections, the corners, anyway.
Right. And even in townhouses, if it goes from vertical curb to driveway, just that it's, kind of consistently transitioning from vertical curb back onto a driveway, back up to a vertical curb. Because lots are so narrow.
Say anything that makes it easier for motor vehicles to occupy pedestrian space should not be in the engineering standards.
I agree with that. And to the other point you brought up, Martin, about, whether or not people would then start to park further apart, taking up the parkway and allowing for more easy vehicle crossing on smaller roads. A lot of those smaller roads are the bikeways of Flagstaff and residential areas. And one of the only safety measures you have as a bicyclist in a non-defined street is that people can readily see you and aren't trying to pass you as aggressively. I know biking back to our house where I live near Kim, as we learned, people routinely try to pass me going up that street and are paying attention to whether there's oncoming traffic. I think if there was a broader space where they could try to pass me and feel like they could avoid oncoming traffic, that puts me closer to the vehicle if they do try to pass. So that also seems not great for me, given how many of our bikeways are two-way small residential streets.
It seems, I think I'm in favor of at least looking at this more. It seems like there are more pros than cons, no, cons than pros there. Sorry about that. But I definitely want to consider being equitable for everyone and not making it more difficult for pedestrians, bikers, or someone who might have some sort of disability, or a mom with a stroller, or any vulnerable user on the roadway.
Is that all you wanted to address with the engineering standards?
So happy to answer any questions if there are more general questions
I
about.
did one question. When I was reading through the document, it talked about having shoulders on futz trails. Having a 2-foot shoulder. What is a 2-foot shoulder on a futz trail considered to be?
It's 2 feet is like a recovery space. So it's not paved in the same material as the foot trail. Like it's not concrete or it's not the aggregate, but it's kind of a flat area that provides a recovery zone for bicyclists before they go off. And we actually have 2-foot shoulders on. I mean, they're hard to see on some trails, and some trails we don't have them at all, but it is already part of our standards.
Okay. Go ahead, Valerie.
Yeah, I guess one more, and I think this was in the part that wasn't up for debate, but I think I saw it had vertical curb cuts on intersections. And it seems like that should be an absolute non-negotiable, like that's something we can say, yes, you did this right. Because we don't want to, it's obvious that a rolled intersection would allow just cutting off that corner and sideswiping pedestrians.
All right, thank you for your comments.
Next, we will go on to the Milton Bicycle Pedestrian Road Safety Assessment.
It's gonna be me.
Pardon?
This is gonna be me.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
and reintroduce yourself.
of course. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Fair. I'm a transportation planner here with the city. And we were recently passed a report from ADOT. It's a road safety assessment for Milton Road from Forest Meadows to Mike's Pike. And we're just gonna be going through some of the key highlights from this, both this document and another one that's related, which is a Milton Corridor Master Plan that was published in 2022. Those are both available as well. So if you're interested, feel free to cruise through those. So to provide some background, the ADOT Safety Group has identified numerous state highway system segments through a synthesis of the statewide network screening process results and consideration of priority locations in the Bicyclist Safety Action Plan and Pedestrian Safety Action Plan. Milton Road from Forest Meadows to Mike's Pike was identified in this process and selected for a road safety assessment due to its high frequency of safety-related incidents associated with peds and cyclists. The primary goal of this RSA is to identify safety countermeasures and practices to reduce the frequency and severity of ped bike crashes on the state highway system. A little background on the RSA team. This multidisciplinary RSA team consisted of 3 ADOT representatives, 2 reps from Jacobs Engineering Group who pulled the report together. Sounds like it's coming down.
We're stuck here for a while.
2 representatives from Jacobs Engineering who wrote the report, and 1 human factors expert from the 4M Consulting Group. A subcontractor of Jacobs conducted vehicle, pedestrian, and cyclist counts independently in May of 2023. And based on the information provided during a kickoff preliminary findings meeting, evaluation of previous 5 years of crash data, and daytime, nighttime field reviews, safety countermeasures and recommendations were produced. So now we'll go through some of those.
I'm gonna enlarge that just so that
Sure, yeah, we can go into
people
it.
at home can see it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Dry people at home.
So the RSA identified a few good practices that were already in place. The first was video detection cameras are in place at all study locations. Also, numerous ADA compliant considerations exist through the study area. There are minimal sightline obstructions. Sidewalks are present through the study area, and retroreflective backplates on signal heads are present at some of the study intersections. Here's a list of some of the key considerations that they came up with. So we'll go through this list quickly. Observation 1, decreasing speeds of motor vehicles contributes to safer conditions for all users in the case of a crash incident. And a possible recommendation is to explore the idea of lowering posted speed limit to better align with safe system principles and accommodation of all users. Some intersections are not fully outfitted with pedestrian signal heads. So recommendation, install countdown pedestrian signal heads at all intersection crossings. Many crashes were observed between vehicles making a turn movement and ped bikes walking on the crosswalk at intersections. A possible solution would be providing a leading pedestrian interval at intersections. Retroreflective tape is not installed at all signal heads along the corridor, so there's a recommendation to install retroreflective tape on all signal heads throughout the corridor to increase conspicuity. ADA compliance issues exist at multiple intersections along the corridor. Make improvements to ADA compliance, including properly located pedestrian push buttons and installation of truncated domes at all crossing termini. Occurrence of pedestrian crossing without a marked crosswalk between University and Plaza, with a recommendation of installing a RFB rapid flashing beacon signal mid-block crossing here. Nighttime visibility does not appear adequate and contributes to ped bike crashes, with a recommendation of conducting a photometric analysis to evaluate if current light conditions meet the minimum requirements. And finally, faded crosswalk markings are not clearly visible for vehicles approaching intersections, contributing to a decreased yield rate to pedestrians. So there's a recommendation to provide high visibility crosswalks at all intersections. Other important information is that what we just went through were more of the sweeping improvements that could be made. They also cited many localized ones at different sites throughout the study area. Additionally, they wanted to touch on the 4 E's. The first one that we just went through is the engineering suggestions, but they also made suggestions related to education, enforcement, and emergency response. And it's important to note that this was done in conjunction with the Milton Road Corridor Master Plan, which is available on their website, which also contains multiple spot treatments for improvements, some overlapping with this work and some that stand alone. And finally, it's important to note that we also have recently applied for a second RSA to be conducted on Route 66, Highway 89. That was submitted at the end of December, and we should be hearing back about that in the coming months. So we're hoping to get another detailed report about that section of roadway. But that concludes this presentation.
Question. So who conducted the study? Sorry, was this put on from the city or from ADOT?
This is from ADOT.
Okay,
Yes.
and I guess has ADOT bought into those solutions proposed?
That's a good question. I might look to Martin for more.
Which part of it?
Okay.
Kind of depends, like.
That was the conflict with the corridor study. It's like actual
Yeah.
implementation, I think, is kind of going nowhere. So I'm curious if now with this new plan, if they've changed their tune and actually want to implement some of these safety measures.
I think, I mean, the local district will obviously get a copy of it, has gotten a copy of it. And that I think they can choose to implement one of the recommendations they want, and depending on funding is what they can do as well. I will say that we can play some part at the city. For example, we have a crossing already included in the capital budget someplace at the approximate location where they identified one. So we, the city, can fund a crossing and get a permit from ADOT to construct it and then be able to implement it that way. Some of the other things we can kind of watch as development occurs along the corridor to see if there are opportunities for the new development to implement parts of it. Other things like, striping, lowering the speed limit are going to be entirely up to ADOT to implement or not.
I seem to recall in the report, there was a mention of not allowing right turns on reds as one of the other possible, I don't remember which section. I read it last night.
Yeah, I think that it was a suggestion, and it
Right.
could have been related to one of the specific,
I think-
one or more of the specific sites that they reference.
Right, I think it was related to a specific site and was partially because of the high incidence of crashes or
Yeah.
what was happening during turns. Would that be an ADOT thing, or would that be a,
Yes,
To not allow-
because that's really operational. It's an operational part of the roadway, which ADOT would have control over.
gotcha. I mean, I think reading through it, they nailed the issues in terms of like vehicles don't yield to pedestrians or cyclists on Milton at all, in my experience, or not without looking very begrudging, and occasionally making inappropriate gestures at you. Step into me. I think too, and I can't recall if this was addressed in the report, but I would just mention that I think part of the jaywalking is mentioned several times in the report, and I think part of that is because you have commercial entities on both sides of Milton, and there aren't crossings between what someone help me out who's better at streets than me. It's like it's not Ranch and
Plaza.
Ranch, is it
Plaza
Plaza.
and University, yeah.
Right.
Are the two.
It's a
closest
super
signals,
long
yeah.
stretch where you can't cross, but there's lots of businesses that people would be trying to get to. It seems like more crossings would also be ADOT probably. Yes, or maybe yes.
Yes, and there's also, as part of the Beulah University project going on, there is going to be the pedestrian underpass being constructed. That's near that area for sure. So that should, but that might be mostly related to NAU foot traffic. But you know, it'll still be available to all users. And yeah, this crossing was a direct, you know, was produced because of that issue, the jaywalking issue. Yeah.
Kevin Hayes has a question, comment?
Yeah, hi, just a couple questions. One of the things I didn't hear that I thought I read in this document was that the bike lane is smaller than it is supposed to be, right? And so isn't that one of the things they found in there, that the bike lane was more narrow than it's allowed to be, than it should be? And I guess my question to you is when you said you're not sure if ADOT is going to do it, like the fact that the bike lane isn't set for its requirements and the ADA is not set. I mean, aren't there some things that we can go to them to say that has to be done because you have to be ADA compliant, right? I mean, and you have to set the bike lane to be its appropriate length. Am I wrong in some of that, or?
On the ADA issue, I'm not sure how that gets enforced, but that if that needed to be enforced, that would be something that, yeah, if there's a requirement for enforcement, that would be up to ADOT to bring whatever is not in compliance into compliance. On the bike lane, ADOT has no standards or official recognition for designated bike lanes. So anything that exists on Milton is an undesignated shoulder.
Really?
Well, was I wrong? Did they not document that in the notes as saying it is smaller than it should be as it's documented with whatever policy that said it? Was I wrong about that?
Yeah, you were not wrong.
Yes.
They talk about bike lanes, but ADOT's official policy is that they don't have bike lanes unless they would allow bike lanes in terms of having that space and formal designation if the city agreed to maintain that part of it. But other than that, they don't have an official recognition or standard for bike lanes. So what the report was referencing is compared to like an AASHTO or some other national guidance for bike lanes, this is narrower than it would be, but since it's not an official bike lane. Sorry, was that bad news? You're not already aware.
Sounds like, I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Like 66.
Yeah.
Shoulder.
Right.
Fort Valley Road.
It's not a bike lane.
Yeah, we could go on.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but does this include making sure that all intersections have access all four directions rather than the ones that just have like one crossing?
Yeah, I know what you're referring to. I don't recall in the report discussing completing like the one, like if there's crossings on three side, but not on the final. I don't know if that's directly addressed, but it could be implied through they discussed putting pedestrian signal heads at all intersection crossings. I think that it would just take further investigation.
Well, I recommend that it be included. And now when you said, I think you said something about reflective reverse on the signal heads. But
Yeah.
could you explain that?
Sure. So that's on on an overhead traffic light, the rectangle that's around the red, yellow, green. That like as it stands, doesn't have anything reflective on it. There are a few sites that do, but there's a reflective tape that you can put there that makes it more visible to drivers, especially in low light conditions.
Shimoni has his hand.
Go ahead, Adam.
Thank you.
That's in Shimoni. There you go.
Hey, everybody. Great conversation, great presentation. I love the recommendations. Just a thought when it comes to budget and funding, which I'm sure is going to be at the root of this, along with maybe some political will on behalf of ADOT. They have a board that meets, I want to say monthly. I'm sure Martin knows, or someone in the room probably knows. And perhaps members of one of these committees, or even, you know, a letter can be written and presented at a board meeting during public comment at the beginning. And that might help raise these topics of interest, both politically and financially. So something to consider that the committee could do that might be successful. Thank you.
Adam? Go ahead. Kim.
Anyone else?
I don't see any hands. Wait, yeah.
AS.
That's Adam.
Oh, that's Adam.
Chris, I have a question. And this, again, I'm learning, so be patient if it's a really bad question. So what's the difference in a safe systems approach versus a Vision Zero? Like what are the, I know obviously Vision Zero is like super strict, like is it close, is it not? What is it? Because I believe in that they did a safe systems approach. So I'm just curious at the difference.
Yeah, as far as I understand, they have similar goals. I'm not super well versed on the differences between them, but Martin might have a better
Okay, so
sense
it's not
of
just
it.
me? Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
Vision Zero is to safe systems, what tissues are to, what Kleenex is to tissues. So Vision Zero is kind of a specific.
Brand name.
Vision Zero is kind of a specific, there's an organization that, it might be even be a trademark name that kind of expresses what Vision Zero is and what it includes and how to go about it. Safe systems is kind of the more generic term for that approach. And it's safe systems is the terminology used by federal highways, for example, in their literature about how to, but other than that, they really incorporate the same concepts
Okay,
for the most part.
Okay.
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
So,
Okay.
thank you, everyone.
Did we want to zip through any of the general business, Martin, or do you want to go straight to Butler?
Go straight to Butler.
Go to Butler.
Susan, how do I pronounce your last name?
Heffley.
Heffley, okay, Chair Heffley, and Matt, what was your last name?
McGrath.
Chair McGrath, Chair Heffley, Chair McGrath, thank you for having me.
Normal. Like,
Yeah. Try my best, stiff times here. Thank you for having me. My name's David Lemke. I'm a Transportation Engineer Associate here at the city, and today I'll be giving a presentation on the Butler Corridor update, which also includes Beaver Street with the pilot bike lanes. And I'll be helped with Sam Beckett here, who's the street section director from Public Works. We'll be presenting together. I know this is a very important topic, so I just ask that if we have any questions or comments that we save them till the end. I numbered the slides, so hopefully it'll be easy to, if there's one that sticks out to you that you'll be able to write it down, and we'll come back to it later. But without furthermore, we'll go ahead and jump into it. So tonight, or there's more to the beginning, I'm sorry. So we're bringing this to you to provide information on the project and to gather comments and feedback. This same presentation will be presented to the Transportation Commission February 7th and to Council February 27th. And Council will provide our final direction on these topics. So it is important for us to gather your comments and thoughts on this so that we can share them with the Transportation Commission and also with Council. So yes, so our topics. Tonight we will cover an update on the pilot bike lanes, the findings from the Butler Avenue speed study and information on future grant and city-funded projects that are planned to occur along Butler Avenue. We actually have some really exciting news on that, so that'll be good. So first, we will cover the pilot bike lanes. When we spoke on this subject last summer, we were tasked with identifying sections of the pilot bike lanes which could be removed to improve snow operations along Butler Avenue and Beaver Street. We collaborated with Public Works and the Bicycle Advisory Committee to find a balance of sections which could be removed. This and the following map show the sections which have been removed. So this map shows Milton up in the top left to Sawmill down the bottom right, with the green being the sections that have remained and the orange being the sections that were removed. And this map is for Beaver Street from Forest to Cherry, Forest being in the top right and Cherry being in the bottom left. Again, green being what is remaining and orange being what is removed. And with that, I will hand things over to Sam to take over these next couple slides.
All right. Good afternoon, all. Sam Beckett.
Yeah, and I can.
No, I love presenting to the conference table standing up just because it's so hard for them. I don't know why it is, but it is for me. So Sam Beckett, I serve as a section director in Public Works, oversee city streets and facilities. As we get into these pilot bike lanes, I feel like there's a lot of conversation that I wasn't here for in the beginning, and I apologize. That was on me. And I want to make sure that I'm here to help answer questions and walk you through what we're seeing out there, what we can provide from a service level, and what we hope to get to. And that's what today's going to talk about. So our ultimate goal here, and from a maintenance perspective, and understanding that this is far larger than just maintenance, right? It's the safety of pedestrians, it's the safety of bicyclists. It's trying to divide that out where we reduce the hazard for everybody. And for me, I have to look at it from that 60,000 foot level up. I also have to reduce the hazard for all transportation modes. So when I look at this, I go, how do I help reduce it across the board, yet keep everybody moving in a good direction? So what we started with was this transition, which I think many of you have probably seen, to that double stripe versus the curb. Well, why did we start doing that? We learned pretty quickly that we can't keep up with the maintenance of these. When we separate the infrastructure from the roadway, at the roadway, it creates new infrastructure. So when we're doing our normal maintenance and everything we have is big. In the street side, we always tell everybody when you're looking for big snow plows, big street sweepers, that's what we have. The smaller equipment we just don't have. We don't invest in it because most of the time that's outside of our infrastructure that we can maintain, and it's outside of what our funding will allow us to maintain. As we go through this, we're going to talk a little bit about the transition, the community feedback that we've heard so far from the operations side, our winter service levels, and then how do we get to a cleaner, more maintainable infrastructure? And there was a great question asked by Martin today is it cleaner if we take it out? I think it is. When you go out there and look at it today, the areas that don't have curb, it's cleaner because we can access it easier. We can get in and out of there. We have the equipment, we have the staffing to support that, and we can maintain those operations. Now, citywide, we struggle across all of our infrastructure. I can't point to a single piece of infrastructure that we own that we go, yep, it's maintained to its highest service level. As a city, we're trying to figure out how do we get there? And that's in all modes of transportation. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So I just sat through budget all day, and as I was building this presentation, I thought I really hate reading stuff. It's always everywhere. I hate it. So I just went with pictures this time, and I'm going to kind of walk you through the story. So as we see, this is one of these kind of trouble areas. Most of you probably know where this is at, just east of San Francisco on the south side of the road. It's one of those areas. It doesn't matter if the curb's there or not. We're going to see ice. We're going to see some issues in this area. When I have ice build up, and you guys have probably seen this multiple times between curb to curb, there isn't a light duty piece of equipment that's going to remove that ice. When there's no curb, we use a motor grader to cut it down as far as we can, and we still can't get it out of there. The motor graders are kind of those bigger pieces of machinery, have a big blade, kind of in the middle of them, not necessarily a truck, more of a heavy piece of equipment. They have a lot of force, they have a lot of power, and they still can't get through that. When we separate the infrastructure out, we look at, can we service this and maintain this infrastructure to the level it deserves? We cannot. And we learn that pretty quickly as we go through this. Last year, we were fortunate to have 2 people help us volunteer and run 2 pieces of equipment to help service these when it snows. Both of those individuals have moved on to new jobs. We ran into a situation where we're running 50% vacancy in streets. We're now back down to about 40%, which is great. But it doesn't change the fact that we had to cut service levels across the city. We had a pretty good presentation to council on December 12th, I believe. If you want to look at that for our snow service levels, they've dropped citywide. We have 26 snow routes, and at any given point, we have 12 to 15 operators, and that's at our highest service levels. During the daytime, our snow operations run 2 staff members from noon to midnight. That's all we're running for trucks. We're running heavy equipment that's starting between 10 p.m. or 2 a.m., depending on the storm, and they'll come in and work a 12-hour shift. So what we're doing is we've moved all of our resources to the night. During the daytime, we run into too much traffic. We run into parking issues. We're not making progress. So we have equipment out there. It's visible, but we're not getting anywhere with it. So when we're understaffed like this, we've shifted all of our resources into our night hours. We're leveraging our parking ordinance. We're trying to make the most progress we can. Well, in doing so, it's even cutting service on this even further. I have nobody to plow these in the wintertime. So what we're trying to do is come in a day or 2 after the storm, get into the infrastructure and take care of it. I had a conversation with an individual and I thought it was a really enlightening conversation. They said, well, why isn't this treated at the same priority level as the roadway? So, well, it was until we separated it. And then I had another question is, well, even when it wasn't separated, there was still snow in the bike lane. There is. And I kind of like the fact that there's both bicycle and pedestrian in here. Because as we look at it, we have to try and find that location from a truck perspective of how do we get the snow out of the bike lane, but not on the sidewalk? How do we do that in a city where we've never really designed with infrastructure to support that? We're starting to get there. Adding parkways is key. So as we move forward, I think that's something we've committed to as a city is understanding how do we integrate parkways? Not because we want to, because we have to. But in the interim, what do? We're trying to find that balance. How do we not completely inundate sidewalks, yet still leave access to make sure that bicycle traffic can get through there? So from a service level, those are the perspectives we're looking at on all of this. We also look at it from what are we seeing from overall movement? Are we seeing increase in accidents? I had this conversation last year when we started looking at that data, when we've seen a trifold in incidents. Somebody said, well, that doesn't matter, they're vehicles. So I've got 2 young daughters. And if I were to turn them loose in a roadway, knowing that accidents have tripled and the only thing separating them is that curb, I don't think that would make me feel comfortable at all. So how do I reduce those accidents? We have to find that balance. We have to be able to keep accidents from vehicles at a minimum. Because every time that happens, it puts somebody who's potentially in that bike lane or on that sidewalk at risk. I don't know if you've seen the fury that comes from a vehicle accident, but that's what we're trying to reduce, right? We're trying to reduce the impacts. Sometimes they're inadvertent, and that's what we're looking at across the board. You can go ahead and change. Who's got the slide?
Yeah, I got it.
One of the other things we've looked at here is we kind of noticed pretty quickly that there's a significant gap in sharrows. Started looking at, well, most people don't understand what this double stripe is. What does it do? What's it for? So as you're going to see all the areas where we removed curbs, any entry point, we're trying to add sharrows there so they understand what is this? Because you can double stripe it all day long, but if you don't have the markings, people are looking for that marking to help them understand what is it I'm looking at here. So we're trying to increase that across the board. You can see right here on Butler Avenue, that's just in the drive lane, or I'm sorry, on Beaver Street there, just above the courthouse. This one here is over by this sawmill area. So one of the items we're looking at is obviously we can't get everywhere all the time. Maintenance on these is significant. I wish there's a more automated way to get to these, but it simply is two people out there setting up machinery, laying down stencils, hand stenciling them, picking everything up, moving to the next one. It's not a very fast process. And when you take into the fact that we have 5 people in all of our signs and markings, their focus is on school crossings, long line regulatory striping, and keeping up with that maintenance twice a year. In the city, we have to keep up with it twice a year because it wears out just faster. We have too many vehicles moving. There's too much usage, and snow operations just annihilates it. So this is one of the items that we recognize that we could step up in that process. Next slide, please. This one here, I always talk about the extra service it takes for snow operations. And until you see it, it's really tough to explain it. The only way that we can safely move snow out of those without completely inundating sidewalk was we had to push it to the center. Which means after we push it to the center, we still have to come back and clean it up. We're also seeing the road stays wet all the time. Our infrastructure is not designed to put all of that snow in the middle because it has a crown and wants to run back to the edges. So we see icier conditions that we can't stay ahead of. We have icy conditions weeks after the storm because we have freeze thaw happening in the center of the road. But the biggest problem we're having is it takes 3 apparatus to plow that one little piece of infrastructure. Because we cannot have vehicles passing and hammering them with snow and ice and cinders from our snow blower. This is what I try and explain to everybody. It's not just one additional person. It's not one additional piece of equipment. I've now had to pull 2 pieces of equipment off their routes and add a 3rd piece of equipment. And then it takes them roughly 3.5 hours to make the loop and do all of that one time. And so when I look at it from what can I feasibly do, I can't keep up with it. And I want to. I want us to find something, a solution somewhere that benefits all. Because I agree with everything I hear from this group in here. We have to do better as a city. We have to provide better service levels. We have to reduce the hazards for everybody. But this right here was a really great pilot because we didn't know. Now we know. But as we've started to make the transition, we've seen a lot of positive. We've seen less accidents. We've heard less negativity. In the areas we can get to, we can service them more frequently. And I think that's what our goal is. There's probably places where we could be successful with this. But we have to find a way to bring in staffing, and we have to find a house for it. There's a lot of things that I want to do from my perspective in streets, and I look at it and her funding, which is highway user tax funds, only allow me to do X, Y, Z. And that's very frustrating for me sometimes. Trying to figure out how do I get this completed with my limitations I have at hand. So I don't want it to seem like there's excuses because I always hate when it seems like a negative kind of or derogatory conversation. It shouldn't be that. I want to find the positive in it. I want to find a way that I can utilize the funding I have, keep up with the maintenance and the infrastructure that we're dealing with at this point. Now I give a ton of credit to the engineering division for going after the funding to change all of this section from Milton to, I believe we're going all the way to Sawmill.
Yep.
I mean, it's going to be the most expensive 1.5 miles of road that we've ever constructed in the city, but it's probably going to be the most impactful because it's going to be the biggest transition we've ever seen. So I'm excited to see where that goes. But until we get there, I want to find the balance. Slide.
That'll be.
No, we'll go over to there. The one piece I will note on here is the double stripe. Right, this one.
Did you want this slide?
No, let's go back to the double stripe.
Oh, the double stripes.
And I forgot to mention this here. We have found that once we set up our striper, we can actually extend this out. So we did. When we did the transition, most people probably saw it. We took this all the way out to the 5 Points intersection there because we could. So basically we said, why not? At this point, why stop and just run it all the way out and see how people like it? So far, we've heard good things. Honestly, we've heard a lot better than we heard when everything was all curbed and we were trying to keep up with it. We heard a ton of negative feedback, and mainly it was from the maintenance side. And that's frustrating for us. It's frustrating for our teams. We have a lot of good team members who take a lot of pride in what they do. So when there's constant negative feedback, it's frustrating. So we've got to find a way to progress in that. And that's what we're pushing for here. So we appreciate everybody's patience in the process. And if there's other ideas, you know, we're open to hear those. But right now we know this is working in a sense until we can start figuring out how do we change that infrastructure from a larger scale. I think that's everything I had. If anybody has any questions.
Wonderful. And I think we'll still save questions till the end, just to make sure we get through the whole presentation. But thank you, Sam. That's great. Jess, that was all good information. I know we're shifting gears here a little bit. That was the pilot bike lanes. And now we're getting to the speed study. So buckle up. So we're going to talk about the purpose of the study, road hierarchy. Slide 9. Yeah. General concepts on how roads are assigned speeds, as well as results, conclusions, and recommendations. So slide 10. So during the May 23rd, 2023 special meeting work session, council tasks staff with conducting an engineering speed study along Butler Avenue between Milton Road and Sawmill to determine if the speed limit could be lowered. Speed studies take the temperature of the road. They evaluate the existing conditions of a roadway to determine if the established speed limits promote voluntary compliance and reflect the 85th percentile free flow speed. And they take into consideration context, geometry, and pedestrian and bicycle use and crash experience. So I would like to highlight some differences as a context example between Route 66 near downtown and the section of Butler Avenue being studied. Route 66 has a speed limit of 30 miles per hour currently because it has high pedestrian traffic, on-street parking, and multiple direct access storefronts. Butler Avenue has a speed limit of 35 miles per hour currently. Because it does not have, and it ranges to 40 as you get closer to Sawmill. And it does not have on-street parking or the high density of direct access storefronts that we find on Route 66. So it's just a context example. It is common practice for municipalities to have a roadway hierarchy with a range of speeds to serve travel needs of the community. Speeds can range from 25 miles per hour for local roads to 40 or 45 for arterials. This map on the left shows the different speed limits which exist currently in Flagstaff's road hierarchy, where the right map shows another example of road hierarchy in the city of Mesa. It should be noted there's a higher density of 45 and 50 mile per hour roads in Mesa when compared to Flagstaff, which is pretty typical when we compare ourselves to the Phoenix cities. We don't have as many high speed roads in that category. Brings us to slide 13. Slower vehicle speeds is an important component of Vision Zero, Safe Systems Approach, National Safety Strategy. Lower vehicle speeds make the roadway safer for all users. Setting appropriate speed limits is part of an overall approach to speed management, but may require additional changes, geometry, enforcement, education. Unreasonable speed limits will not be followed, we found, and may introduce other safety concerns like speed differentials. This brings us to slide 14. So it is written in the Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 28, that a local authority shall determine by an engineering traffic investigation the proper maximum speed for all arterial streets in its jurisdiction. And this applies to Butler Avenue because it is an arterial street. And these are the current speed limits on Butler Avenue in the section being studied. You see Milton Road up in the top left and Sawmill in the bottom right. And we go from 35 from Milton to Lone Tree and then 40 from Lone Tree to Sawmill. And the 85th percentile speed is defined as the speed at or below which 85% of vehicles travel. And this is a big part of the ADOT traffic guidelines and processes, which we followed for this study. Speed zoning is based on the principle of setting the limit as near as practical, the speed that 85% of drivers consider to be reasonable and prudent. And speed limits established by an engineering and traffic investigation encourage voluntary compliance because they appear reasonable to the majority of motorists. And unreasonable speed limits are typically ignored. To improve safety and efficiency, it is desirable for traffic to be going close to a uniform speed, as differentials in speeds leads to higher crash potential. And to encourage uniformity in traffic speeds, the 85th percentile speed is free-flowing traffic is the standard starting point for determining the appropriate speed limit. All right, so these were our results when we put pneumatic tubes out on the road. In the blue, you'll see the posted speed limit of the road. And in the orange, you'll see what we found is the 85th free flow speed, 85th percentile free flow speed. And we found from these results that they were matching up fairly close at all locations. They weren't more than 2 miles per hour apart, and that was at the Murdoch Center. All the other ones are within 1 mile per hour. And based on these results, it's apparent that it aligns closely, and it also aligns closely with the design speed of the roadway. So in this chart, we're looking at the vehicles who are violating the speed limit in green. And I just want to make it clear that this is assuming that vehicles will drive the same if we lower the speed limit. So in green, you have the existing vehicles traveling over the speed limit. That'd be 35 miles per hour for the first two categories and 40 for Lone Tree Sawmill. But if we lowered those by 5 miles per hour and assume the vehicles travel the same, suddenly we have a larger portion of vehicles who are violating the speed limit. And when we met with the police department and discussed these results, they had concerns that they would not be able to reasonably enforce a speed limit, where in places 63% of drivers are in violation. So the results show that the vast majority of drivers are driving at or below the speed limit, and that the posted speed aligns with design speed, which aligns with the operating speed. When compared to other minor arterials in Flagstaff, Butler Avenue was average for total crashes and speed-related crashes. Slide 20. This is the high injury network for the city of Flagstaff. It is a tool to isolate sections of road within the city which experience severe incidences. The section of Butler Avenue being studied does appear on this map. It's outlined there in blue, but it is in the lowest frequency category, and it doesn't stand out when compared to other similar high volume roads like Route 66, Highway 89, or 4th Street. And just to talk more about this map, yellow are areas where there is 4 to 7 victims who had severe fatal incidences. Orange is 8 to 11 severe fatal incidences, and red is 12 to 15 victims who suffered those sorts of incidences. And so this brings us to slide 21. Due to the results of the engineering study, it is recommended that the speed limits on Butler Avenue remain the same to promote voluntary compliance and encourage uniform flow and avoid an undue burden on the police department. Staff is committed to reevaluating the speeds on Butler Avenue after the completion of the Safe Streets for All grant and the Lone Tree Overpass project. And that segues us into the future projects that are occurring on this road that we're really excited about that will change the character of the road. And that is the Lone Tree Overpass and the Safe Streets for All grant. Both projects include enhanced bicycle and pedestrian features that are new to Flagstaff. Right, so we're excited to announce that the city was awarded $9.6 million through the Safe Streets for All grant to improve pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure on Butler Avenue. These improvements include 3 protected intersections, one at Butler and Beaver, one at San Francisco and Butler, and one at Lone Tree and Butler, or no, one at Sawmill and Butler. Lone Tree and Butler is for the Lone Tree Overpass, but I'll get to that in a little bit. That also includes 2 enhanced crossings. We're going to enhance the one at Humphreys and Butler, I believe, put a mast arm over, because right now it's just on the sides, and then add another enhanced crossing similar to that in RFB at O'Leary and Butler. We're really excited about that. And we're also raising the bike lane to the same level as the sidewalk while adding a parkway where space permits, because we do have a good amount of right of way along Butler, where there are places where we can put a parkway, and in other places where we might not have as much room, we'll still have the sidewalk, like a wider sidewalk where the bikes will have their space, as shown in that picture on the left. And for those of you who may not be familiar with protected intersections, that would be the image in the middle. And they include signal improvements such as leading pedestrian intervals, bicycle signals, and crosswalks with separation between bicyclists and pedestrians, They also have bump outs on each 4 corners of the intersection to tighten the curb radius and reduce vehicle speeds as they're turning. And so that's obviously having a big impact on the Butler corridor. And at the same time, the Lone Tree overpass is underway. I believe they will start construction this year. I believe they'll start construction on this project. And it includes wide multi-use paths along the bridge, which will span from Route 66 to Lone Tree. Oh, I guess I have my mouse, but I don't know. We'll be, nah, never mind. Don't have my mouse. And has protected intersections at Butler and Lone Tree, but also to the south at Lone Tree and Franklin and Lone Tree and Sawmill. And it also includes a signalized intersection at Lone Tree and Sawmill, which will be kind of new. And so I just want to thank you all for going through this with me and Sam all the way to this point. I know that was a lot of information, and I would like to summarize what we covered. Staff is recommending transitioning the curves to double stripes on both Beaver Street and Butler and keeping the speed limit on Butler the same. The goal of setting speed limits is uniform traffic flow, which is achieved by setting appropriate speed limits. We are committed to reevaluating Butler Avenue speed limits after the completion of the future projects. And with that, I'll thank you for your time and open it up to hear any questions or comments. Well, definitely comments, because we want to bring those to Transportation Commission and to council.
Questions, comments? Go ahead.
I hear you about the Butler speed limit, but I think the key is on your last slide is reevaluating after these changes have been made and look at our crash data as well. Because sometimes design solves some of these problems, but I don't think design should be counted on to solve all of the safety issues.
I wanted to bring up the fact in December of 23, Amsterdam changed the law so that all their city streets, 80% of their city streets will be limited to 30 kilometers per hour. And then the remaining 20% of their streets that are higher traffic, higher volume, faster are limited to 50 kilometers per hour. And to break that down to American standards, 30 kilometers per hour is 18.6 miles per hour. And 50 is something like 31.1 miles per hour. And think of that in terms of what we've been listening to. Clearly, Flagstaff isn't ready to be Amsterdam. But it would be nice for those of us who are the backpack group. And obviously that is a huge transition. They made those determinations because the cities were tired of accidents, kids getting killed, that kind of thing. There's this town in Switzerland that's even been doing this since 1992. See, I did get 19 right that time. But yeah, where they've implemented this, they have seen much lower accidents, much worse damage in the accidents, lower noise pollution, less air pollution. It's kind of a really neat thing for me to think of, because one of the things I look at when I read how the 85% figure doesn't allow for how Flagstaff integrates that 60% of potential cyclists into the city streets that they're afraid of. So I just wanted to throw that out. And it certainly would be a fantasy for me to see lower speed limits, as we've said over and over again. It would definitely help the bike ped groups feel safer and be safer. And it would help a lot of other things as well. Any other comments? Kim?
I have 3 questions, actually.
Go.
Okay. Sam, is there a timeline for when the Safe Streets for All project is going to be implemented? Right, we were awarded. Chris, who, I don't know, who knows the answer to that question?
What do we think? So based on timelines that we've produced through the grant, I would say that it could be safe to say that construction would begin sometime in 2026, 2020, around then, with a year for, this year for all of the gears to turn and move into design to reach 100%, and then moving into the next construction season. Hopefully completion all said and done 2027. Safely.
Okay, so with that timeline, then the double stripes that's being recommended and everything being removed would be there for a couple of years before things were put back in. Okay, my next question, have there been any studies, and I know let's bring it to the United States maybe, even though Amsterdam's, I'd love to go there. I'm sure it's great. Are there any studies about lowering speeds and how drivers responded to a lowering speed? Because assuming drivers are going to speed, do you know what I mean? Like, the first, you know how it said they've complied pretty well, like assuming that they're gonna speed like 63% over a lowered, you know what I mean? That assumption is just kind of like, well, maybe not. I don't know. We're assuming, you could assume good and bad, right? So I'm just wondering, were there anything studied? Like, is there anything written that we can look at and say, oh, well, they really didn't comply? You know what I mean? I'm just curious. That's all I was wondering.
No, that's there is, yes, there
There
are
is?
studies that look
Okay.
at these things. Martin and I have done a lot of research to try to come up with an answer. And there's studies that show that lowering the speed limit by itself doesn't have an effect. But then there's also some studies, like case studies, that show that it did have an effect. So we feel like we don't maybe have enough information yet to say definitively, but at least from the engineering side, like typically, I can think of 3 studies where they lowered the speed limit in the 85th and 50th percentile speeds, like the mean and the 85th remain the same. And there are some changes maybe in the highest offenders. We're going really fast, but overall, I'd say inconclusive, maybe leaning more towards, it's hard to quantify what effect it's having.
Right.
Typically, they look at if you change the speed limit in isolation to making other changes to the roadway, like geometric changes.
Mhm.
On Butler, we made 2 geometric changes. We added the median a number of years ago, then we added the barriers just more recently, without having changed the speed limit. So we did the geometric changes, but didn't change the speed limit, which is the opposite of what most studies look at, which is just looking at changing the speed limit without making the geometric changes. Did that make sense?
So there's nothing really good to compare it to.
That's
Because we did
sounds like you've
opposite.
Done something that would have lowered the
Right.
speed, that would lower driver's speed by making those geometric changes, or could lower.
Yes, and
driver's
that,
speed.
and that, I think that we had before and after with the median, it did have some impact.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Speed limits, even without changing the speed limit.
I'll throw this out there. So as you look at the project that's going to come into play, and this is something that David and I have talked about, and Jeff and I have also talked about as well. They are going to be adding speed radar signs.
Okay.
What's the one thing everybody hates? Being called out when they're doing something bad, right? It's just the way it kind of plays out. So I'm not an engineer. I don't have all the data on it, but what I know from being out in the field and from crews being out in the field is they tend to use their brakes a little bit more when everybody can see what they're doing wrong. And one of the items coming up here is if those speed radar signs are maybe a potential, maybe we move those up in the process of this implementation. So maybe they get installed sooner rather than waiting for the project to be delivered. I know that was an ask of council. They wanted, was the flashing lights
They mentioned
around the signs, and maybe we find something that helps people acknowledge there is a speed limit on that road. Might be helpful, in these areas where we see it. We do it in other areas. We just did it on Linda Vista, an area that we know. We hear a lot of feedback from residents that people speed through there. So we added those speed radar signs in there. So far, they've helped. So something to think about. It is in the grant application. So we'd have to look at making sure that doesn't change the scope. You start breaking ground on projects
Right.
while you have funding coming in, it could mess with that. So you gotta be careful with that, but that's something to think about.
So you're saying like knowing the speed limit is 35, you're, and say speed limit's 35, you're going over, under, whatever. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying drop it? I'm curious, I'm clarifying. And then see what happens. I
I don't have a recommendation on this.
just the signs
Yeah.
seem to work.
I'll leave that to.
It's like a police officer and everyone slams on their brakes because they don't want to take it. Okay.
Yeah, I can understand where PD's coming from. There's really nowhere to sit, there's
Absolutely.
really no access for them, to enforce that. in many
And it's an
areas.
important component, right?
So it's tough. So it's kind of that self and peer enforcement.
Yeah.
Mentality. But again, I'm not an engineer. Just
Awesome.
looking at it from the operations side.
Thank you. Thanks.
Could we go back to the slide that compared Butler to the other things? Because I think for me, and we've talked about this before, one of the major distinctions between Butler and some other roads with comparable speed limits and volumes is that Butler borders campus. And so while the pedestrian flow may not be as high as downtown, which is the highest pedestrian flow in the city, I assume, it's pretty high. I mean, people are crossing across Butler in large groups at all times of day to get to and from class, across many different parts of Butler, especially now that Sawmill's been so much more developed and people are trying to get over the complex by Whole Foods, not the road, sorry, is more developed and people are trying to get over from there. But I seem to recall that we had previously looked at data that the incident of, if not collisions, then near collisions or injuries is actually pretty high at Butler and Beaver and Butler and San Francisco. Am I wrong? And then also that Butler and Milton is a hot spot. That's been like a known hotspot for decades in the city where people turning off of Milton onto Butler hit pedestrians and cyclists there. So I feel like, to me, Butler has some qualities that other streets don't have, namely that pedestrian traffic volume of being so close to campus. That's why this group was interested in lowering the speed. It's more about reliably that you have so many people going through at kind of all hours of the night, many of whom are new to Flagstaff, or maybe have only been here a little while, or are driving to Flagstaff for the first time too. Because, since I work on campus, watching parents drive around campus, it's an exercise in people going the wrong way on one-way streets. Just there's a lot. I feel like the fact that it is so close to campus would be something, not being a traffic engineer, just want to say that obviously in case it wasn't clear, but just something that would factor into an evaluation of what's an appropriate speed for this street, because unlike some other streets, it does border people's access to campus.
Can I follow up to that?
Got three people on.
Yeah, go with them first.
I'll take them in order here. Daniel Krim, go ahead.
Oh, I apologize about the background noise. They're vacuuming our office. The cleaning crew is here. But just an observation. We only change the speed limit if the drivers voluntarily drive slower to start with. Is an odd. I mean, if the speed limit was 40 miles per hour, would people voluntarily drive 35? Maybe they would be driving 40, and we'd be looking at a study that said speed limit's 40 here, and that's fine. I just, from an outsider perspective, I find that to be a very odd starting point for the conversation.
Thank you, Daniel. Dapper Dre, you had a comment?
Howdy, everybody. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all the work. Both seeing what we have and what we're hopefully working towards. I guess and I made this statement in regards to this before, is why is the 85th percentile the only metric that is kind of used in this. If there's any other dynamics that can be taken into account, I think Sam had a good recommendation on the, do we have numbers on the amount of pedestrians that use those crossings? In the sense of crossing across Butler at Beaver at San Francisco, as well as, I know you did have the metrics of it being rural versus downtown versus suburban, maybe, I forget what the 3 sections were. But population density in that area, as was mentioned by Sam, Sawmill has been quite developed. You have adjacent neighborhoods, south side, north of University, and just the number of potential people that are going to cross there, I think is important to take into account as a broader cross section of what you folks are looking at, and not just who's traveling on the actual roadway and what their speed limits are, but what kind of road friction they're going to come up against. So people using crosswalks, people on bicycles, people using that corridor, not just the consideration that only vehicles are using that corridor, and how that contributes to the assessment of the potential for speed limit to be lowered, what that looks like. Because I think going only off of the 85th percentile is a pretty myopic view of how you determine what the speed limit can and should be. And also, it's a very short stretch. I mean, we're talking about less than a mile, 3/4 of a mile. And so to consider throwing out, any sense that anything can be done for that limited amount of road, I think is, you should be able to do something for that, especially with that amount of population density and use of that corridor by things and people other than motor vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you. And I agree with what you're saying there. Kevin Hayes, you're next.
Hi again. Thank you. I do want to commend you guys for the raised curved idea, that raised curve all the way through. I kind of love it. I'd love to see it go all the way to Milton, frankly. But I do want to kind of bring something up as well, and it kind of seconds what Dre was saying, and maybe I missed it in here, but I just wanted to, between Sawmill, which is by the credit union, and Babbitt, which is by the Taco Bell area, I didn't see, like right now, there are no pedestrian crossings, and it's over a half a mile in distance. So when you have this solution, did you have a pedestrian crossing in mind between those 2 areas? No. Okay. So please think about that. That's over a half a mile crossing between the 2. And also at that one end is where the bus station is. So there's a lot of tourists that don't really know the best way to traverse through town. So when we have that high speeds going in there, they're going to have to walk over a half a mile just to get to the other end if they want to go to Sonic or something like that. So please consider that as you look at it. As well, I want to just say again, though, if you look at it, those Hawk pedestrian crossings don't work for people who are colorblind, right? So I want to think about other solutions for those too that everyone can use equally. So anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kevin. And we've got one more comment from Adam Shimoni.
Thank you, Chair. Great discussion. I want to warn everybody, I'm somewhere where alarms periodically go off. So if it does go off, I'm just going to turn off my mic and you should just move on. But I'm going to try to go through it quickly through my comments. Sam, thank you. Dave, thank you for the presentations. Very good updates. I want to just share a couple historical things that Councilmember McCarthy will recall. The original petition that pushed for these elevated bike lanes on Butler also spoke to lowering the speed. And a lot of the crash data we received after implementing these bike lane pilots was because in my opinion, cars are going too fast, right? And so we never lowered the speed, which is why we're still having this discussion. And I'm glad we're having this discussion because that speed needs to be lowered. In regards to snow maintenance, yes, it's tough. And some winters are going to be heavier than others. This current winter, not too bad, right? So I really think we should keep them in place because the double lines don't slow cars down. I'm sorry. As soon as we removed those double lines, I noticed cars swerving into the bike lane along Butler and going a lot faster, which is probably why we haven't heard any complaints, right? Because they're kind of back to their normal behavior. And that's not really supportive of cyclists. And I think we all agree the future plans are great and that's wonderful. But until then, we have this. And before we remove it, we haven't even done any education and outreach, which I know this group has talked about numerous times. And I've heard Martin speak to it. But yet we still haven't done any outreach and education to my knowledge. And so maybe that's where we start. And the current speed is deadly. 35 and 40 miles an hour we know is deadly for pedestrians and cyclists when crashes occur. And as Sam and others spoke to, this is the school zone basically, right? This is near schools. And I think as part of the Safe Streets for All grant, it spoke to Butler being one of the most dangerous corridors, if not the most dangerous corridor in Flagstaff. And if we lower the speed here and other places around town, that might be a political driver to get ADOT to do the same on Milton and other locations. So think about that, committee members and staff, that if we want ADOT to lower their speeds, maybe we start by lowering our own. And then lastly, Vision Zero and Complete Streets talk about lowering speeds and making it safe and comfortable for pedestrians and cyclists. So we talk the talk, we have these values, but yet here we are wrestling with implementation. So I think we're in a good place. I think we're in the right direction. But I think that not lowering the speeds is taking a step back. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Can I say one more thing? Sorry. Oh, I just wanted to say for people who haven't met me before, my day job is as an archivist at the library at NAU. And so I look at a lot of historical sources, and since bicycles are a topic of interest to me, one of the things I've done is just research the history of bike lane development in Flagstaff and then various complaints that have been brought to the city about their bike lanes, which, as you might imagine, are numerous and manifold. Something that has come up in a lot of the sources I've consulted, typically newspapers, kind of over and over, is speed-related injuries, and especially injuries near NAU. That's always been the place where many crashes occur because that's where we have some of the highest numbers of regular pedestrians and cyclists, because the student population tend to be pedestrians and cyclists. So these issues, come up kind of over and over again. And I think a lot of people in this room are very excited about Vision Zero and these plans and everything that you all are doing and realizing. And anything that could be done prior to 2026 that signals, your commitment, which I know you have, to improving safety to everyone, like considering lowering the speed, I think would go a long way for issues that are literally decades old, right? Anything that you could do faster that's not dependent on infrastructure, which is never a fast solution. That is something else, a change of policy, more education efforts, or a change in speed limit. That's something that wouldn't necessarily, I think, again, not a traffic engineer, require the same time frame, but would address sort of these long-standing issues in a really substantial way.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah,
So,
I'm definitely disappointed in the recommendation from the city. I think this topic has come to both PAC and BAC multiple times. And I feel like we're all saying the same things that we've said over and over. So I feel like either, it's not fully being heard. I do think there's been geometric changes. I mean, through the pilot, the roads have narrowed. We've added the vertical delineators, which that also slows down traffic. And then from the survey results that have been presented previously, which was not in this presentation, drivers felt stressed out, especially going into the Sawmill corridor. They felt, kind of unsafe. But that was, I would think, largely kind of reading between the lines, is that we didn't lower the speed limit. We added a lot more pressure onto the system by reducing the roads, doing a lot of these traffic calming measures, but then didn't do that final step, which is lowering the speed limit. I find the slide about the major fatalities, that this only had 3 to 7 or severe crashes or whatever the term was. I think that's disappointed to use that as a reason why we shouldn't lower the speed limit, because I know the city doesn't have a formal Vision Zero policy, but I think hopefully we can all agree that we want to have 0 deaths on our roads. So just something to think about for when you present to council. Yeah, I don't find that a compelling argument. Yeah, I don't know. I just think to rethink like some of the decision, because I just think the various points that we've all made, yeah, just doesn't quite match the recommendation.
Could you go to the one that showed the 2 pictures of Milton? There we go. So if the only thing I looked at was those photos, it would be pretty clear to me that those streets are very different. However, I've walked in and ridden on Butler, and I can say that this is not representative. And Butler, in the area of San Francisco Street, Beaver Street, and through that corridor, is very different than that. And it has a lot of pedestrians, as my friends here have pointed out. So to me, another thing I'll tell you is that and I've driven this corridor many, many, many times. And just knowing about this discussion, I've looked at my speedometer when I go through there, and I go about 30. That's the speed that feels appropriate to me. I'm just one person. But I think the argument that the speed limit here on Butler should be the same as on Route 66 near downtown actually has some credibility, a lot of credibility. The other thing I'd like to talk to about real briefly is this idea that, well, if you change the speed limit, it won't make much difference. So before I retired, I was a controls engineer. And one thing we learned is that when you make a change, an input change, is there's some factor or some multiplier in there. In other words, if you change it 5 miles per hour, it's not going to go 5 miles per hour difference, but it's not going to go 0 either. If you lower the speed limit, it'll probably lower the actual speed, maybe 3 miles or something. So yeah, I agree with what we're hearing, that people won't automatically lower their speed 5 miles an hour, but they will lower their speed. And as some people lower their speed, it's going to get the other people to lower their speed also. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Can I ask, Martin, you mentioned that Minneapolis, I believe, lowered the speed limit. Do you want to, did you have any more information on that? What happened?
No, not really much beyond that. I think there are a couple of big cities that have either explored or actually changed their speed limits kind of globally on local streets and arterials. Like I think in Minneapolis, it's 20, in the US, yeah, it's like 20 and 30. I don't know, do you guys have any, I know we've looked at other studies from places. Do you remember some of the other cities that have done that?
Yeah, so one that comes to mind is Boulder, Colorado. They did an initiative called 20 is Plenty, and they lowered all their 25 miles per hour streets to 20. And they did a study before and after and found that it didn't have any changes on the speeds. All the speeds were the same. That's just one example, though. There's another example from Boston where they lowered all their speed limits from 30 to 25. And they found that the 85th and the 50th percent stayed the same, but that the highest violators who were going above 35 miles per hour did see like a 1% reduction. It went from like 4.9 to like 3.8. So I said, okay, like there's some from this, but it didn't really touch the majority of the drivers.
Jody has her hand up.
Yeah, well, and I was just gonna say, I mean, that all depends on enforcement.
It's true.
Like culture, education, all those things that we bring up and never seem to happen.
And they found that in the Boulder one too, that when they did have enforcement, that it was much more effective, that people were going that way. But the challenge was that they couldn't have enforcement like citywide, everywhere where they needed it.
Thank you, David. Jody, go ahead with your comment or question.
Yeah, it's supporting most of what other people have been saying about the lowering speed limits. And while I've been looking at this, I've been on the NHTSA.gov website that has countermeasures that work for speeding. And they give lowering the speed limits like 5 stars and low cost. And they do mention that it either needs to be accompanied, and they list study after study after study after study showing decreases both in speed and especially in accidents. So I'd recommend, I put the link in the chat because that was fairly convincing. They do mention that enforcement is key, or else being followed up with traffic calming measures, but it seems like a period of enforcement for the couple of years until we get some of the reconstruction things done could be a viable alternative. That's all.
Jody, you have to put $1 in the acronym jar. Can you tell us what it stands for?
National Highway Transportation and Safety, something or other. NHTSA, doesn't everybody know NHTSA? I work for the government. It's like, where's your acronyms? Yeah, what is that? National Highway? Let me go back to the site.
And Nancy has it.
You were 85% of the way there.
Susan, I have a question.
Go ahead, Matt.
On the slide 17, when you use your, are they figuring out the 85 percentile? So that just incorporated vehicular traffic? Like if there's a bicycle going down the road during that test, was that even considered?
Not in these ones. With the tubes that we put out on Butler, they're half round, so they're our thickest tubes, and they're not sensitive enough to pick up bicyclists. So it was only vehicles in these speeds.
All right, so if you had 20 vehicles going, say 30 miles per hour, and we had just one bicyclist doing 8 miles per hour, it would skew those results. It would drop that 85 percentile. Would you not agree?
Correct, yeah, but bikes weren't included in.
But it's traffic flow down.
Yeah, it's true, yeah. So there is like a range of speeds, and this is just the 85th percentile, or one standard deviation away from the mean. Like there are some people who are going slower, but 85% of them are either going 34 in Drury or lower.
Jumping real fast, David, do you mind talking about removing the speeds that were on the lower end because it was out of signal?
Sure, yeah.
That's what he's referring to?
So another way that we tried to make sure our data was as accurate as possible was looking at vehicles with a min gap time of 5 seconds. So that means that we wouldn't get vehicles that were stuck in a queue, like some of the slowest vehicles, get the free flow speeds of the traffic. And in certain places, when we looked at the speed distribution graph, most of them were normal graph, but some of them had like a small hump at the bottom if they're closer to a signal. So we binned the data to only look at the majority of the crashes to make it as accurate as possible.
So binned the data, if you had a bicyclist going down the corridor, would that be one of those that get dropped or?
No, bicyclists weren't picked up. They weren't, the equipment wasn't sensitive enough to sense that.
Oh, okay.
It's only vehicles, yeah.
But what I'm hearing, now I'm going to my comment. So according to your presentation, you referenced the Arizona statute, which says our local authority can dictate what the speed limit is, but we don't have data to support the data or we don't have data to support lowering the speed, right? Even though everybody seems to be when they bring their emotion to it, everybody wants that, but we don't have supporting data to make that justification to lower. Do you agree with that?
Yes, no, I'd agree. And that's been one of the challenges of this study is that there's a lot of explicit direction related to the 85th percentile speed. And from the engineering side, it's seen that the road is driving the speed of these vehicles. Like it's not really a choice, but like the way it's designed, the widths, the medians, this, that, they all kind of contribute to how people are driving. And we want our speed limits to be reflective of that as possible, like so that everyone's in a uniform flow. But there's not much guidance on how to take into consideration like the bicyclist, the pedestrian use. Like we've considered all those things, we've looked at them, but we still feel that 35 is the appropriate speed from an engineering standpoint. But that's why we're coming to the Bicycle Advisory Committee and the Pedestrian Advisory Committee to get more feedback on that in case we missed anything.
It's also probably worth noting that the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, AKA MUTCD, which sorry, which provides guidelines on how traffic signals and signing and pavement markings are done. Provides some guidance on how to set speed limits using the 85th. And that there's a new version of METCD manual came out this summer.
A couple months ago, yeah.
And has a different approach to using the 85th percentile for setting speed limits. And specifically, they ask, there's more flexibility in using the 85th, and they ask that on urban arterials and roads in urban areas that the 85th percentile alone not be used, that other factors be considered. And then they list 6 different factors, which include things like the roadway environment, the context, ped and bike activity, the crash history. And that's a fairly new development. Previously, their guidance was that the speed limit shouldn't vary more than 5 miles per hour from the 85th percentile.
Well, I would just want to make a comment on Matt and your comment there that it is very telling that the 85th percentile by design is not including the bicyclists in that calculation. And that's, I mean, you guys have been doing the best you can, but it's a repeat of something we know all the time, that the bicycle and ped community is not being included in the algorithm intrinsically. Go ahead, Estella.
Just one thing to add that is also, I think, at least not in the presentation, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Safe Streets for All grant, you had to evaluate the speed limits through a new Federal Highways Administration metric.
We'll be using US limits 2 when.
Okay,
When it's
and I
installed.
believe the recommendation was 30 miles per hour from that.
Correct, yeah, from US limits 2.
So, okay, so I just feel like that, I mean, if the Federal Highway Administration is saying that it should be 30 miles per hour, there's just a big gap of data that I think is now presented to kind of show another way of viewing the speed limit.
Could you explain what we just went through here? Who made a recommendation that?
Yeah, so FHWA has a web-based tool called US Limits 2 that you can use to help inform speed limits. You put in things like driveways, 85th percentile speed, 50th percentile speed, and it helps you make the decision, okay, what should the speed limit be on this road? And when we used it, we played around with it, looked through the manual, and we found that in our context, it was basing things off of the 50th rather than the 85th. And ultimately, engineering decided that we wanted to more align with the 85th to achieve uniform flow more. And that's why we decided to diverge from the US Limits 2. But as far as Safe Streets for All is concerned, we'll still use that once that project is completed to inform what the speed limit should be when it's changed.
And US Limits 2 does ask about roadside context. Is it urban areas, is it suburban? What's the level of ped and bike activity? What's the crash history? So they ask about other questions as well. In addition to what's the 85th percentile speed, what's the 50th percentile speed?
But the outcome was 30, the recommendation from US Limits 2 was 30.
It was 30 between Milton and Lone Tree, and then 35 from Lone Tree to Sawmill.
Go ahead, Kim.
So I'm trying to come up, so as a compromise, right? Because obviously, Sam, it was a great presentation, and there are limits to what Public Works is doing to keep our roads clean and dry and taken care of. And obviously the gap before the Safe Streets for All happens, right? So there's a 2-year gap. So it seems to me we might need to find a compromise, like Sam said. So maybe that compromise is lowering, the speed limit. If councils or if cities recommending removing, right, to make Sam's job easier, removing the existing curbs and stuff, right?
Yeah, just to be able to maintain the road. And
Right, to
that's your
maintain.
win. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a win right now, but it's your win.
Right, so if, you know what I mean? So to kind of bridge that gap, maybe lowering the speed limits to be proactive instead of reactive and waiting for another crash or, you know, our numbers to go up and we're like, oh, our numbers are up. Now we should probably lower the speed limit. I would hope that maybe as a city, we can be, proactive. And including education, assist police, because enforcement's gonna be a big issue if this happened, right? So assist the PD in enforcement, put the signs up, something to assist. But it seems to me there needs to be a compromise of some kind in that transition period before we get the awesome infrastructure of, you know, the grant.
Technically, a compromise would be 32 and a half.
32 and a half.
Okay, 32 and a half.
Oh. That's good.
It's not the 3/5 compromise. Daniel, you had a comment?
Yeah, and I should have said this before. I really appreciate all the work that's being done by all the community partners. The streets folks have busted their backsides to keep the streets safe for us. And I get it that they're underfunded and understaffed. And I'm curious about the terminology of within 5 miles an hour. It looks like the 85th percentile is at 34 miles an hour. It sounds like we could have easily made a recommendation for 30 miles an hour based on that. And maybe I misunderstood that, but am I correct that since it's the 85th percentile is going 34 miles an hour, at least in two of the sections, and 39 miles an hour over at Dutch Bros, that data supports within 5 miles per hour, a 30 mile per hour speed limit. And you guys could have made that recommendation based on that data. And then it's, again, outside looking in, it's so interesting to me that when a car slows down for a pedestrian or a bicyclist who's crossing the street, that's not taken into consideration in the data. Just as a, it's just the whole exercise seems it seems to be done in a way that is taking the fastest that they move in the corridor and using that as the average.
So,
Go ahead.
should I respond?
Go ahead.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Daniel, for the question. I'll start with the comment about METCD and within 5 miles per hour. So staff decided to use ADOT guidelines, which recommend as close as possible to the 85th to achieve uniform flow. And I know I've said that a few times, the uniform flow is based on the idea that if you have differentials in speed, that increases the likelihood of a crash. So that's something we're trying to avoid. We want cars to be traveling all pretty much the same speed on the roadway, which is what we're seeing in the results. So that was a decision we made to do the ADOT guidelines instead of the METCD. So I hope that helps answer that question. And then as far as how we're looking at the speeds of the road and how we're doing the free flow speed, that's also related to the ADOT guidelines. And I haven't thought of it that way before. I am relatively new to this, but I appreciate that feedback that it might be a little limiting if we don't have the bicyclist speeds involved or the pedestrians. So I'll think about that, and thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you, both of you. It's 6:30 now. I know we have 2 more comments left. Yeah. Are we being asked to provide a response to your recommendations today? Or do we need to do anything in response, or are you just collecting information?
Martin's getting carpal tunnel over here, like.
I might look to Martin on this one. I think he.
Yeah, we're not Not looking for a formal recommendation. We're just collecting your comments.
Okay. Then I'll go to you and then Dapper Dre after Valerie.
You go to the
Go.
very last
Sure.
slide with the recommendation. So I think everyone's done a really good job on the speed limit point. But I also want to provide some strong pushback against this top bullet point, transitioning the bike lanes to double stripes, an emphatic no, especially in the context that we are not lowering speed limits. We talked about how geometric design is part of how speed limits or speeds actually get reduced. We made a lot of concessions last year and we have not seen those. I mean, it's been less than a year since we removed those additional ones. And it's too early to talk about removing additional ones. We have 3-4 years to go before we implement the safe streets for all. We don't want to go backwards on that. And I understand that maintenance and winter maintenance is a huge issue, but clearly it's a staffing issue, it's a budget issue, it's a system-wide issue. And using our bike lanes as a scapegoat for the entire process is a little bit inappropriate. So we would like to keep them.
Thank you, Valerie. Well said. Dapper Dre, you got a comment?
I just had a quick question, or seeing if you guys have data. Do you have maps of where the most pedestrian usage is? Is there like a, city map, much like you have kind of the different corridors where crash data is taken? Do you have a similar map where it shows where the most people cross the streets and use the sidewalks?
That is a great question. I know we've counted Humphreys before, that RFB at Humphreys, but I might look to Chris and Martin as far as maps. Do we have like a actual map of that information or like a good source for our pedestrian data?
Not within my time at the city, but I know Martin has a lot of GIS data stored away. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, we don't have that data. That's more complicated to collect outside of kind of that location specific counts that we've collected. The closest we can get is we can kind of map the density of pedestrian generators and attractors and use it as kind of a predictive model to, in theory, this is where the most pedestrians would be, but we don't have specific counts or of bicyclists either.
When somebody hits the crossing button, is that registered anywhere? Is that counted anywhere? Never mind.
No.
I hope so.
The police states, surely someone's counting that.
Okay.
The one other point I did want to make also too is that as far as the carbon neutrality plan is concerned, that has a 2030 time guideline on it, as far as trying to reduce or get to carbon neutrality. And from what I hear on most of the timelines of these projects, a lot of them won't see completion until very close to that timeline. So just a consideration for the question of how are we going to get to carbon neutrality if none of the avenues of alternative forms of transportation are usable or safe until the actual time that we are trying to get to carbon neutrality at. So just a sense of, timelines is something that would be the sooner the better is always greater. And like you're saying, if there's concessions and compromises, sometimes it's change it and then take the data from that point instead of taking all the data of why you shouldn't change it and just considering that you don't have to do anything until somebody else gets, in a crash or there's more problems because you didn't do anything in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dapper Dre.
Susan, can I make one quick comment?
Sure.
And it won't take long. Twice in the present, and I agree with like 99% of what's been said. like twice in the presentation, it says lowering the speed limit would be an undue burden on the police department. So if it's determined that lowering the speed limit is going to reduce the threat of critical injury or death to a pedestrian or a cyclist, I agree it's a burden. I strongly disagree that is an undue burden. If that's what we need to do to keep people safe, twice it says it's an undue burden. And I think that's an incredibly unfair way to frame it. Like we're inconveniencing people. If that's what we need to do to keep people safe, we should do it.
Thank you, great point. Well, it's 6:36 now. I usually like, I mean, since we're not being told to come up with a recommendation or a decision here, it's clear we could go on a while. If we all wanted to weigh in on this, and part of me wants to. But like we've been saying, since this pilot program went in, it hasn't, we haven't solved the problem of how to encourage more bicycles and peds onto this system, which is our job. And I look at it in conjunction with climate change. Our highest priority should be luring bicyclists and pedestrians onto our roads and passageways. And it's never going to be easy to make change like that, but it's nevertheless very necessary for our city's health, for the global health, for everybody's peace of mind. Change is difficult, and we're there. You know, it's the city is having a real hard time keeping these paths clean and dry and safe. But I think I'd still rather bike behind one of those curb barriers than out in Butler normal. We said the last time we were told to come up with a recommendation, we said we want to see these elevated paths funded in the plans before we tear out the rest of those curbs. And show of hands, how many of the backpack people would like to buy that? I'm seeing a lot of hands. How many would not? 2 hands. So we're still, oh, good. We can let out class as soon as the thundering rain is pounding. There's still a lot to do. And I think most of us want to stick by our guns and make sure that the little progress that we've made in the last few years is not thrown away without something suitable coming in its place. Adam has one more comment. I feel like there's more comments. But
One more comment.
We could just go till 6:45. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just need 1 minute. I just wanted to share, I really appreciate the passion and discussion that this group had, the backpack group. I do have concerns that this will not be fully reflected to council, this level of passion and concern. I'm grateful that Councilmember McCarthy is here and can help champion our voice here. But I just want to encourage all the committee members to email council and to engage on the 27th of February at that council meeting. Please don't think that your work is done just because we spoke up here in this meeting. We really need the council to hear your voices. And I think your voices are very appreciated and worthwhile on this very important matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks again to everybody that presented today. It's a lot of hard work. And I hope you don't feel like the piñata. But progress is painful, and we still appreciate everything you do. With that, I'm gonna close the meeting and bring your questions next time. And like Adam says, be sure and weigh in at the city council meeting, either with your presence or an emailed comment, so that we can get our passion across. Thanks, and have a good February.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night. Thank you.
Yeah.
Works for the meeting before that too.